Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, this time with the third and final episode of the history of Marvel Comics. When we last left off, Marvel Comics was going into the 90s with a brilliant new crop of artists and writers from Todd McFarlane to Rob Liefeld. However, trouble started brewing as these new young artists were ones that started to make a name for themselves. Todd McFarlane finally ended his frustration with Marvel when he left the company altogether and went to Malibu Comics for financing of his own comic. Meanwhile, X-Force #1 was released in August 1991 by Fabian Nicieza and Rob Liefeld to record-breaking sales of 5 million, thanks in large part to variant cover gimmick in which each comic was bagged with a different collectible card, 5 in all. With all this success, Marvel went public, with most of the money going to Ron Perlman. X-Men #1 then came out on August of 1991 by Chris Claremont and Jim Lee with multiple variant covers that, when put together, formed one large cover, resulting in 8.1 million copies sold and Marvel stock climbed to $40 a share. However, this new success led to Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee to meet with Todd McFarlane and Malibu Comics near Central Park about forming their own comic book line. They then went back to Terry Stewart for Marvel's counteroffer, and after leaving unsatisfied, managed to get artist Mark Silvestri to come along as well. As a result, Marvel's stock dropped on February 17, 1992, when the young artists they had promoted for so long left, along with poor financing in general. This left the company scrambling, even as a new 2099 line had started up, which took place in the future, featuring futuristic versions of classic Marvel characters like Spider-Man and Doctor Doom. Thankfully, Marvel was being helped by its highly successful toy line at Toy Biz, and its executive, Avi Arad. The son of Holocaust survivors and an Israeli native, he served in the IDF fighting in the Six-Day War where he was wounded. Arad grew up reading Superman and Spider-Man comics, which have been translated into Hebrew. He later moved to the United States, where he worked his way through college to get his BBA at Hofstra University, where he eventually became an executive at Toy Biz, working alongside co-owner and fellow Israeli-American Isaac Perlmutter. Despite the stock loss, Bill Bevins, Perlman's #2 man at McAndrews, bought Flair, the trading card company, for $265 million. Then on June 6, 1992, Martin Goodman, the founder of Marvel Comics, died at his home in Palm Beach, Florida, at the age of 84. He was given little fanfare or mention in the comics or the company he started so many decades ago. Meanwhile, Image Comics, the new company formed by McFarlane, Lee, and Liefeld, was breaking sales records with Spawn, Wildcats, and Youngblood, leading to Marvel and DC being shut out of the top 5 in sales for the first time in February of 1993. So successful was Image, Chris Claremont would end up getting over his previous frustrations working with Jim Lee to work on his series Wildcats, where he introduced his own character, the Huntsman. Marvel, in desperation, started trying more outlandish events, like bringing Elektra back to life without Frank Miller's approval in Daredevil. Meanwhile, Scott Lobel, the current writer of Alpha Flight, Marvel's Canadian superhero team, made a significant social move for Marvel by having North Star come out as gay in issue number 106 in 1992. Lobel, who was openly gay himself, had been wanting to make this move for years, and North Star was a natural choice. John Byrne, who wrote Alpha Flight during the 80s, hinted at North Star's sexuality but couldn't say it outright due to the CCA restrictions and Jim Shooter's own policy against openly gay characters. Bill Mantlo even tried to make him HIV positive at one point, but that was nixed. The news about Alpha Flight number 106 was huge, with the issue selling out, but also controversial, with upper management downplaying the event for years afterwards. Nevertheless, in astonishing X-Men number 51, in June of 2012, North Star would eventually marry his fiancée Kyle Jendo, depicting the first same-sex marriage in a mainstream comic book. At the time, though, Bill Bevins wanted a merchandising empire with Marvel and felt such controversial moves would have a negative impact. Thus, he assumed 46% interest in Toy Biz for master license of Marvel and $7 million in capital. As part of this deal, Avi Arad started developing Marvel film and TV properties, which soon included the X-Men animated series, which premiered on October 31st, 1992 on the Fox network. A remarkably faithful cartoon that stuck to the series' continuity along with the long-form storytelling, it would run for 76 episodes till September 20th, 1997. Most notably, it stuck with the comic's themes of bigotry and racial prejudice, producing numerous intelligent stories, and today ranks as one of the best American cartoons ever produced. With this cartoon, Marvel established Marvel Films as a brand, and one Avi Arad had every intention of protecting. Reportedly, he bought Roger Corman's cheap Fantastic Four film with the intention of destroying it, considering it hazardous to the brand. Sorry, Mr. Arad, thanks to YouTube, everyone can still see this movie, which, quite frankly, is the most faithful adaptation of the comic book to date. Granted, Corman reportedly just made the film to keep the rights, knowing he would make more money when he sold the license back to Marvel. His autobiography is titled, How I Made 10,000 Movies and Never Lost a Dime. In 1994, Marvels was released by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, a tribute to the Marvel Universe history. The story takes the perspective of Phil Sheldon, a reporter for the Daily Bugle who follows the superhero phenomenon from the first appearance to the Human Torch and Namor to Spider-Man. The genius of using his perspective is that you truly see how marvelous these characters are, from a human's perspective. For example, when Galactus attacks New York, Phil feels like an ant to the actions of gods. Thanks to Busiek's faithful writing and Ross's gorgeous realistic art, it remains one of the finest Marvel miniseries ever produced. Despite this excellent comic, sales still dropped 36% that year. With the comics in free falls, Fabian and Chesser offered a restructuring the editorial staff, but the result was so haphazard Tom DeFalco left the company altogether. Even worse, the now infamous Clone Saga began in Spider-Man books. The less said about that event, the better. Despite all this turmoil, Marvel bought the Panini sticker and magazine company for $158 million, and then bought Malibu Comics, from which Image Comics had long since broken free. Despite this spending spree, Marvel instituted its first layoff since 1957, a true sign of trouble brewing. Marvel still kept buying, though, acquiring Heroes World on December 28, 1994, a comic book store chain with the intention of using it as their distribution network, along with Skybox, a trading card company, for $150 million. However, Marvel soon discovered Heroes World didn't have the infrastructure to support their business. With sales still declining, Marvel decided to bring back Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld to reboot Captain America, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers with the Heroes Reborn event in the 1996-1997, which was done with Barb Harris as editor-in-chief. All the while, Stan Lee had become a full-time celebrity, complete with a cameo in the movies The Mallrats. However, by January 3rd and 4th of 1995, Marvel had lost $49 million and resulted in layoffs of 275 employees. The Excelsior line was soon abandoned, while the Spider-Man movie, which was supposed to be directed by James Cameron, languished for years. Nevertheless, Marvel sold a chunk of their stake to Toy Biz to start Marvel Studios. Meanwhile, the horrible and overly long Clone Saga and the Spider-Man books started to ruin the sales, with many in the industry mocking Marvel as a joke in the comic books world. Nevertheless, Howard the Duck returned in the Spider-Man Team-Up number 5 before an extended guest appearance run in Generation X, a new version of the New Mutants comic book. Finally, all of these bad financial moves caught up with Marvel, and the company filed for bankruptcy in 1996. With no distribution network, Marvel joined Diamond Distribution and the rest of the industry and canceled Heroes Reborn, firing Rob Liefeld outright when he refused to accept a pay cut. In response, Liefeld tried to do a Captain America ripoff, first trying to license Fighting American from Joe Simon, but couldn't agree on a price. He then tried to create his own character, Agent America, but Simon threatened to sue him over it, so Liefeld finally reached a licensing agreement for the Fighting American. Then Marvel threatened to sue him over that character, which was settled when he agreed not to let the character throw his shield like a weapon as Captain America does. During all this time, Liefeld's relationship with his fellow Image creators soured, and he was forced out of the company. To keep Marvel afloat, Toy Biz bought out some of the company's debt, and when asked who should help revive the comics, Gerard Shamus of Wizard Magazine recommended Joe Quesada and Jim Paolimenti, former freelance artists who worked at Marvel, DC, and Valiant before forming their own company, Event Comics, back in 1994, with their own comic creation, Ash. In 1998, Event was contracted to do Marvel Knights with the intention of reviving Daredevil, Inhumans, Black Panther, and the Punisher. Also, The Heroes Return was launched, heralding the end of Heroes Reborn and the return of these characters to the regular Marvel fold. As for the business side, Marvel was having trouble finding buyers due to its complicating licensing deals. Despite that, on September 27, 1998, the company emerged from bankruptcy when Marvel and Toy Biz merged into Marvel Enterprises. Things were looking up across the board for Marvel as Blade debuted in cinemas on August 21, 1988, grossing $131.2 million to a $45 million budget, becoming Marvel's first successful film adaptation. Marv Wolfman, who created Blade in comics back in Tomb of Dracula number 10 on July of 1973 with Gene Colan, would sue Marvel but could not get none of his peers to help, as at this point Marvel had clearly locked away all the rights with their contracts. Meanwhile, Joe Quesada managed to get acclaimed filmmaker and comic book fan Kevin Smith to write the relaunched Daredevil at Marvel Knights, with Quesada himself handling the art, while Grant Morrison created a new Marvel Boy with artist J.G. Jones in 2000. In 2001, Morrison would team with artist Frank Quitely to revive the X-Men and New X-Men comic book series. All the while, Stan Lee quietly negotiated a new pay raise in salary while the company fired other executives to save money. Marvel then dubbed Flair and Skybox for $26 million and acquired the film rights to Spider-Man back thanks to a legal loophole in the original contract, along with $10 million. However, Joe Simon, the co-creator of Captain America, decided to sue when the copyright went up again while Chris Claremont returned to the X-Men. Bill Jemas, the former president of Flair, was then named the new president of Marvel and set out to create the Ultimate line, which would reboot all of the Marvel characters while maintaining the original line, since this would be a separate one. On March of 2002, Ultimates, the Ultimate line version of the Avengers, debuted by Mark Millar and Brian Hitch and took a decidedly political tone. Most significant, though, it reimagines Nick Fury as a black man who looked just like the actor Samuel L. Jackson. This was a deliberate move by Miller and Hitch and would have huge ramifications later. The X-Men movie came out on July 14, 2000, a huge success, eventually grossing $293.3 million worldwide against a $75 million budget and launching the X-Men film franchise. Back on the comics front, thanks to the success of Marvel Knights, Joe Quesada was named editor-in-chief of all of Marvel Comics and decided to clean house. He quickly set up a good cop, bad cop contrast with President Bill Jemas, whose outrageous statements and micromanaging had rubbed more than a few people the wrong way. At this point, while getting more money than ever from Marvel, Stan Lee was nothing more than a figurehead and outsider. He was soon making a name for himself, though, in cameos in film. He briefly appeared in the X-Men film, but with no lines, and TV, and would eventually sue Marvel for a larger share of the money. They ultimately settled for $10 million and a guaranteed annual salary. As for the movies, Marvel truly broke through on May 3, 2002, when the long-gestating Spider-Man movie was finally released to record-breaking box office, eventually grossing $821.7 million worldwide against a $139 million budget. Directed by Sam Raimi and starring Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker's Spider-Man, it would garner huge fan and critical acclaim, along with, of course, a sequel in 2004, Spider-Man 2, to even more acclaim, with some still calling it one of the best comic book movies ever made. Of course, there was also Spider-Man 3 in 2007, which, while still financially successful, was felt as a letdown to the fans and critics alike. Nevertheless, Marvel was in the movies big time, and by 2008, they were going to change the industry. Back on the comics front, though, with the success of trade paperbacks, Marvel instituted a mandate that all stories had to be 4 to 6 issues run to make them easily collected. It also created the Max line, which was a part of a larger move of Marvel leaving the comic books code authority altogether and developing their own in-house code, something that would finally bring about the death of the hated CCA. The Max line was meant to be a completely adult comic books, most notably where Jessica Jones debuted in Alias on November 2001, created by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Malov. Creating a new superhero, Diamond, who was retconned into Marvel's history, at one point she was an Avenger, Jones is now an alcoholic private detective investigating her former superhero teammates. Despite this mature line, Joe Quesada set out to recruit teenage audiences, following Bill Jemas' mandate, who wanted books to reflect the tone of the popular Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV series. Jemas was also making negative news with his feud with writer Peter David about canceling Captain Marvel, a low-selling book that nevertheless had a rabid fan following. Jemas challenged him in the Youth Decide contest, in which he wrote Marvel, while Ron Zimmerman did Ultimate Adventures, and they competed against Captain Marvel over who sold better. The winners stayed published, while the other two would be canceled. Marvel ended up being a childish satire of the industry and universally panned, with both it and Ultimate Adventures losing to Captain Marvel in sales. Jemas would change the bet a few issues in, stating the loser instead got a pie to the face, but ultimately Marvel and Ultimate Adventures were canceled, with Captain Marvel continuing for another 25 issues. Despite this, Jemas did revive the Epic line in 2003 with the hope of bringing in top creators with copyright guarantees, along with getting new talent to work on lesser-known properties. However, Jemas eventually made too many enemies at the company and was forced out of Marvel in 2004. On January 1st, 2005, Mike Perlmutter became the new CEO of Marvel Comics and most hands-on in recent years, with strict management style that with the AV-A-Rod forced to play damage control. He would scrap risky comic book proposals such as a Princess Diana comic, while firing writers thinking he would do a better job himself. This management interference led to Grant Morrison to leave for DC. Then, in a shocking move, Marvel Comics wouldn't have a booth at the San Diego Comic-Con in 2005, the first time in decades. Nevertheless, there were some bright spots, such as the recruitment of Joss Whedon, the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, to write Astonishing X-Men in 2004, with John Quesada doing the art. In the series, he brought back Kitty Pryde, resurrected Colossus, and changed the costumes back to more cartoony ones.